and welcome to Books and Beyond. My name is Jimmy Bennett. I'm your host. Books and Beyond is a show for writers, authors, illustrators, artists, anybody. We like to let people get out there and show their work. I am real briefly, I want to talk about CAPA, the Connecticut Authors and Publishers Association. I am co-chairman of the Southeastern chapter. There's a chapter in Avon, the main chapter. There's a chapter in the Northeast corner of Connecticut and in the Southwest corner of Connecticut. CAPA is a wonderful organization. It's a really great networking for writers, agents, illustrators, publishers. It's inspiring to all of us that write. Anybody that has anything to do with the written word is welcome. Anybody's welcome to tune into our meetings, and we're doing them by Zoom now during the pandemic. Our chapter meets every third Monday of the month at 6:30 on Zoom. And if you go to the Southeastern Connecticut CAPA Facebook page, the link is usually on there. More than welcome to join us and check us out. I was honored to be a speaker at the Southwest CAPA meeting last month, where I met some wonderful writers and authors, and one of them was Matilda Dumbrill. Pardon me. And so I'd like to introduce Matilda to you now. She's got some fascinating stories and some great books. Matilda, how are you?
Well, I'm fine. I'm glad to be here and to see you again and to talk with you.
All right. So when did we'll just get a little background on you. Tell me a little bit about your life and how you got into writing.
Well, Jimmy, I think I was telling tales before I could really make sentences. And according to my parents, I was a storyteller early on, and they loved telling this story about me at age 3, when I used to go over to our neighbors. They were 2 families of Italians, and they'd sit out under the grape arbors doing the rosary, and I would wait there until they were ready, and then they'd say, "Tell us a story, Matilda." And I would close my eyes and make up these things that they thought were very funny. One of them was about the talking typewriter, and they were so amused, and I felt so important that I'd run over there even before I ate my dinner, just waiting till the rosary was over so they would say, "Tell us a story, Matilda." And all through school, I was able to write very well because I had, as my mother said, a gift of talking. So I wrote there, and then at college, I went to UConn, and I was in a contest that Vogue ran at that time. This is back in the 1950s. And it was called the Prix de Paris, and the thing was you had to write various essays about why you wanted to work in fashion, because I could sew, and I thought I was going to go into fashion design. Well, I was one of 12 in that contest, so I thought, I better go into writing. So I, after college, graduation, I applied for a job at Vogue, and yes, they hired me maybe at $40 an hour, and I couldn't live on that, so I got a job at Women's Wear Daily in New York on 12th Street, and I was there for several years until people found out, some of the editors found out that I could sew. And that began my career of many, many years as a costume designer with private clients, designer and stitcher. One lady called me a seamstress, which I didn't mind. I charged her more. So I was what I was. And then I was traveling. I took 14 months off to travel through Europe. And I realized that my parents were more interesting than I thought they were. my father had deserted the Tsar's army in 1912, came to the US, was sending money to my mother, and for 6 years, neither of them heard from each other. And she told us these stories, which we wouldn't listen to. But finally, she came to this country. She lost 4 children, then she had 6 children. I was one of them. And I'm now going into my book and why I wrote it. So while I was traveling in Europe, this was in the mid-60s, I met a good number of people who had actually been through the Depression, been through the war, and they told tales, and I thought, if they're so interesting, my mother and father must be interesting too. So while I was traveling, I wrote my first book, and just never had it published, never did anything with it. And finally, after I was married in 1970 and had time to sit down and do more typing, and when I had children, I realized that I had a very good story. And that is how I became, rather than just sewing, I went into writing. And that was back in the late 70s, 1970s. And I finished my book. My son, it took me years, actually. I didn't take it seriously. My son had it published through self-publishing. And it is out and has been out for a while. It's the story of my father and my mother. They came to this country, as I said. I'm out of picture. Can you still hear me?
Yes, oh yes, you're here.
I'm
I
out
can
of
still see you.
picture.
Yep.
There you are again. Okay. Okay. This is such fun. It's
Yeah.
so technical.
Yep.
Anyway, it's a true story, but it's fictionalized. And the basic story that is true is that during the Depression, the selectmen, and I grew up in Chester, Connecticut, which you know through your books because you've written about that area. I grew up in Chester, small town, and the selectman was doling out food. They were canned things and shoes for children as we were growing. And he would have my mother sign, that he'd given her 6 pair of shoes. And she'd say, no, that it says 4. And he said, oh, you can't read English. She said, I read numbers, in her accent. And so she began to tell people down street at the grocery store that he was cheating the government. And he heard about it, and he had the power in his hands to have her taken away to an asylum in Middletown. He had the 6 of us. My youngest sister was still, what they say, on the breast, still nursing. She wasn't a year old. And so we were dispersed. The 6 children were dispersed into 4 different families. We were there for 4 years in different places. And my mother did get us back through the help of a minister. Now that part is all true. I made him suffer so because I made up a lot of things. See, I visualized how he must feel inside. So I really gave it to him. But one of the interesting things is I sold the book through several shops in Chester, and everybody, even though I had given him a fake name, everybody in town knew who he was. So you can see that he really did finally go to jail for embezzling money from the bank. But I felt that after I'd written that book, I had sort of given my mother a gift. She was dead by the time I wrote it. She died at 97. And yet I still feel every time someone reads it that they know her story. She used to say, I want to tell my story. And we'd say, oh, Mom, I've heard it 100 times. But there's a point in your life when your parents become interesting to you.
Yes.
Suddenly real people, not when you're a teenager, not when you're 25 and you, oh God, not again, Mom. But I'll tell you, once I was grown up and heard other people's stories. And to me, I will say this, when the stories about the children being separated from their parents at the border, I could hear my mother screaming again, "Give back my children. Give me back. You're stealing my children." And I get so upset when I hear that, because it's long in the past. I don't dwell on it. I haven't been marked on it. I've had a wonderful life, but I can still hear her screaming. They took us away in 2 different cars, and she was banging on the window and screaming. And I was 7 years old. But I have given her a gift with that book, and I hope people will read it. I'll hold it up. It's I don't know whether I've called it mccorker, the green cigarette. And mccorker is the Russian word for tobacco or cigarette. And the green cigarette is this. When my mother finally was able to get, the reason my mother was able to get to this country finally was that after 6 years of not hearing from her betrothed, I guess they call them that, she was walking past a tavern. She heard laughter and she looked in, and there was my father's brother, Vladimir, smoking a green cigarette made out of an American dollar bill. And it seemed that he and the postman in this little village were in cahoots. They were stealing money going both ways, coming from her and going out my father was sending money. They didn't send checks then, they just sent money in an envelope. So she was then able to get in touch with my father. She came here, and then the rest of the story goes on. I think it's a touching story, and people who've read it sometimes cry, which is what I meant them to do. But I took revenge for my mother on what I made this man suffer so.
Good.
He actually did suffer.
He certainly seems like he deserved it. I got to tell you, Matilda, I am just absolutely fascinated. Number one, I write about kind of that era. My book was set in the early 1920s.
Yeah, the early 1900s.
So it's fascinating for me to meet somebody whose parents actually came to this country at that time. Back then. And I don't want to break any taboos here and stuff, but you are 90 years old.
I'm 90 years old. I have a good face cream, and my son set up the.
No, you look wonderful.
You know what?
But I'm more fascinated with the fact that how you live through these times. That's it's incredible to me, in this day and age, to think that back then somebody could just point their fingers at somebody and send them off to an asylum.
Yes.
And break up a family like that.
Yes, they did. They did. And and there are many families when you talk to them, because they had the power, and particularly where there were foreign families, they wouldn't know what to do. They told my father she had to go to the hospital because she'd had so many children. And he believed them. He was, his character, some people don't like what I did with his character, but it's the true father. He was deaf by the time we came back. I was 10 when we came back, almost 11. He was deaf, so we had very little communication, but we did find a notebook after he died, and he had written in Russian, in Cyrillic. There's poetry, and I included that in my book, some of the poetry.
Oh, wow.
So the people who translated it said, no, he wasn't just a peasant. It's possible from a small town that he may have been in seminary. So in my book, I'm writing that he was in seminary, where he would have learned the world and the, that he'd be interested in that and so forth. But also, talking about that era, and your book about Sherlock, well, not really Sherlock, William Gillette, to put another thing about Chester, my girlfriend and I used to ride our bikes to the ferry, and then cross over and go up to Gillette's castle. And this was soon after it became a public place. But what you're right, when you write about it, it's so spooky because we had no idea of all the funny stuff that he was doing with it and so forth. So,
Yeah.
boy, that I have to get my girlfriend who lives in, I think she's now in Colchester. I can't keep track of her all the time. But she's my age, and I hope she has good eyesight. So I want her to read your books because she would get a real laugh out of because we went over 4 or 5 or 10 times during the summer. There's nothing else to do in Chester in the 1940s. So I'm getting your book to her as well.
Oh, good. I just think it's absolutely fascinating. I mean, you have lived through so many eras, so many upheavals in this country, and I gotta say, I'm a little touched by the fact that when you hear about it at the border where they're taking children away from their parents and stuff like that, it's hard. I guess I don't understand it as deeply emotionally as you might, because
totally.
It happened to you so many years ago, but it's making me think a little harder now, which is good, which is what the thing. So the name of your book is mccorker.
mccorker, the green cigarette.
Right, the green cigarette. I definitely going to check that out. I usually don't read books until after I've had the authors on my show because I don't want to know more than them. You know what I mean? I want them to tell me about it.
You don't want to say, why did you write that?
Yes, yeah. But you know what? Now you also have a second book, which sounds pretty fascinating to me too. My Bare Ladies and a Few Clad Men.
Yes. Now, in the years and years that I was I would call it a dress designer, dressmaker. It's really I worked first of all, for people in New York, a few of my friends who were editors on women's wear. Then I went out to Arizona, and I had the very good luck of finding people right away who were of a level enough so that I had really interesting customers. And of course, in fashion, name dropping is your big deal. Now, Claire Booth Luce, I don't think young people know who she is.
I actually know that name myself.
Most people do. She was one of my customers. They'd come out there in the winter. And I was intimately involved with the household because a good friend of mine was her secretary when she was out there. So I have some good stories on her. And then other people, the governors and the senator's wife and people like that. And everybody you meet has a story. And when they're naked, well, I won't say naked, when they're down to their bra and pants at a fitting, you learn a lot about them. The hairdresser used to know plenty, but the dressmaker knows more. And so here's the book, My Bare Ladies and a Few Clad Men. And it's illustrated by a good friend of mine in Arizona. She's a cartoonist, and she can't cartoon anymore because she has arthritis. And that's what's holding up but here, this is a type, I don't know whether this shows.
Yes, it does. That's wonderful.
This is after when I left Arizona to go, we moved, I was married, had a baby. We came to Connecticut for a year and then moved up to Boston, where my husband was with, who was he with? You know what? I can't even remember. He had several jobs up there. We were there for 37 years. And then we moved down here to Orange in Connecticut into a 55 and older development. They're single standalone houses, which one of ours is, and some triplexes. And guess what? You see a lot of old people here. Yeah. They walk around. And my husband is younger than I am. And not that much younger, but 9 years younger. He says, well, he's going to live to be at least 95. And I say, oh my word, Richard, you're going to leave me as a widow at 103. This can't go on. So many people here are so uplifted, and it's so when they're you look out and you don't see really old, decrepit people, because if you were in a nursing home, I guess that's what you would see. But there are people who range from 55 to, I played bridge until this all started with the COVID, with a man who's now 97. And he was a Marine. He can't get around very well anymore, but he sure has brain power. So we played bridge, and now he's there at home. He's lost his perambulation skills. And so you meet very interesting people at these 55 and older places. They've read my books. His comment reading about my father, he said, "Oh, why couldn't he do something about that?" And I said, "Bill, he couldn't hear. He believed he was such a devout Greek Catholic or Russian Orthodox. He wouldn't sit down for a cup of coffee without the crossing himself. But he believed everybody. We could tell him any kind of a story and he'd believe us."
Yep.
So, he was
Well, I mean, I think when you think about it, you should cut the man a little slack. I mean, to desert from the Russian army in 1912 and make your way to America is an incredible feat.
yes, yeah.
Oh,
As a young man, he had the nerve, but he was, and I think when you're deaf and you, well, he spoke fairly good English by then, by the time we were born. But I think you don't get the whole story when, and you believe, and you believe authority. That's the other thing. If you're in the army, then you're in seminary, the army, and then you're believing everything.
Yep. Yeah. I can see that. I mean, I think, well, let's face it. I think that people had a lot more faith in officials and governments and stuff back then than they do now.
And then a lot of people, most people believed whatever.
Right. And it did cause for a lot of injustice in a lot of ways too. But I mean, I just think it's just absolutely fascinating. I love the green cigarette, the dollar bill rolled up, smoking a dollar bill. I just think
that's incredible. That what were they getting paid? My father worked in. He had a little farm. Somebody helped him buy a little farm. It's still in our family up there in Chester.
Oh, nice.
And he then worked. Chester was known as a town of hills, rills, and factories. There were 9 factories in Chester at that period until the Depression. So the small farmers who were making a pittance, selling milk or eggs, all went into the not all, but most of them went into the factories where they'd get a paycheck. Right. So they paid them in cash in an envelope in that period. And he would take the bills and put them in the envelope and send it to Russia. It's not like the mail. Well, I don't want to talk about the mail, but the mail then, it got through, but it took weeks.
Yeah, weeks.
And months, you could send anything. The post office on our end would send it out, but nothing came back on either side. But
well, I think not only is it, I think, a wonderful tribute to your family and your parents. I think it's a wonderful thing you're doing. I encourage this for everybody, is to keep a journal, to write things down to their children and their children. As you say, I've got a long history. My family has a long history in Long Island. I used to hear the stories when I was younger. Didn't really pay much attention to them.
Right, exactly. Yeah.
But when I got older and I had children of my own, I really started listening to the stories, and I was really fascinated. And sometimes I'm going to try. I actually have a kind of a book in the works where I'm trying to work some of my family story into the book, kind of thing. But so what else? What else are you working on now? I know you're still going, right?
Well, the cat book, I'm that's sort of laying back, but the spy book is really, it's not really a memoir, but because I based it on people that I met all through, I decided I had to have a plot. And the plot centers on me as the main character and the reality of the people I met and the kind of people that, so it's really fiction, but it's, I have so much reality because in the past, maybe 10 or 15 years, I have run into people who've been in the OSS, that was wartime before the Secret Service, before it became or melded into the CIA.
Right.
I've met CIA people. I was talking to a man here in the village, in our Fieldstone Village is this development in Orange. And I was talking to this man and we were talking about something or other and other. And I said, oh, you know what? You sound like you were with the CIA. I thought, ha, 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 I laughed. He said, no, special ops. So I said, oh, tell me. So I interviewed him like a good old editor, and I got the best information and so forth. And then I've also got a book written by a man who was with the OSS, whose daughter is was one of my customers in Massachusetts.
Okay.
So I have a lot of inside information, plus the fact that I was considered a CIA agent by several of the embassies as I was moving through Europe. I had a Eurail pass, which at that time was $250 a month. You'd go first class, you could get on any train without a reservation. I showed my Eurail pass. I'd get off in places. I went to places that nobody would go to. And I was single. I was in my late 30s. And I gave no information. I was very careful. Nobody knew what I was doing. So the more people I met, the more I looked like, what was someone like that doing around? So they would talk to the embassy. They would say, maybe there's a CIA person there. So, and I didn't even know what the CIA was at that time, actually. I had no info. But I had 14 months in Europe, all over the place. And,
wow, that's
and
incredible.
then I came back and worked a while. Then I took another almost a year traveling down into Iran and Israel and into South Africa. And that's where I met my husband. So my life changed completely. And I brought him back here. And all my customers who had worked for years and years trying to find a husband for me, they jumped for joy. I can tell you they were the happiest women in town.
Well, I'm sure he's happy too. Matilda, this has been fascinating. I could talk to you for days upon days. And when your next publication comes out, I want you to come back.
I will.
Unfortunately, we're running out of time here. But a half hour isn't enough really to tell your story. So we'll definitely have to have you back on again.
Okay, I really appreciate it. And I'd like to talk to you about your book because you have things in there that are so detailed that I wonder how you ever found out all that stuff about the fairy, all that stuff.
Well, now, real quick, I want you to tell me how to find your book. I want you to tell everybody how to find your book.
You can go on Amazon and you can ask for, you can go into my name, Matilda Dumbrill. I'll hold it up here so you can see. Does that show?
Yep.
And you can put in mccorker, and it all comes up. You can put in Matilda Dumbrill, and that would come up too. And the books are available through Amazon, both books. And when I have the next one published, it will be on Amazon as well.
All right, great. Well, we'll definitely be looking forward to that. That's going to do it for today. I want to thank everybody for tuning in. And I want to thank Matilda. This was a great show, fascinating to me. Like I said, I can go on and on and on, and I hope we'll be able to do it again soon.
You see why I make up stories. I could never stop.
Yeah. I want everybody out there to stay safe, stay healthy. Do everybody a favor, wear your mask, be careful. Let's get through this so we can keep moving. But while you're stuck, keep reading. All right, take care now. See you next time.
Yes.